All right, so with that, I'll go ahead and get us started. Let's first start by talking about the digital business movement and what's happening in the marketplace with regard to digital delivery. We really think that some of the key trends, one of the most important of those key trends is what's happening with regard to mobile. The criticality of the mobile revolution now has reached, we think, a really critical inflection point. And it was really in this past year, 2014, that we saw that the milestone of where folks accessing the internet via their mobile devices exceeded the access and usage by desktop. And in fact, 55% of all e-commerce traffic on Black Friday came from mobile. And it's really important to just kind of take a moment and appreciate and understand what that means to you and your business. The implications are actually very far-reaching. If you take a step back and just think about all the digital channels at the disposal of a marketing or e-commerce owner, no digital channel is growing faster, and we think really is less understood than the mobile channel, whether it's mobile web or native mobile apps, especially native mobile apps. They're not an extension of your web presence, but it represents a new stack and a new set of user expectations where the customer is king. And it's being driven largely by these demographic changes. If you look at the chart on the right-hand side, it's the rise of the millennial in not only the consumer space, but also the workspace. So by the year 2020, just 5 years from now, over half the workforce will have been born after the year 1985. And so, the implications of that are that you have an entirely different set of user expectations to not only meet but to exceed. And how you're going to be successful in providing an experience that really is excelling in the delivery of your digital service when you have a user with that high expectation is really an important challenge. And it really means that you need to rethink the way in which you actually go to market with your digital offerings. On the technology side, there's also a very important shift that has occurred. There's a perfect storm of enablers that have really arisen and are fueling disruption. And it's a new combination of cloud and mobile and big data technology. And these technologies are less and less directly controlled by the IT organization in an enterprise. Digital owners now have a massive range of services that they can more easily and nimbly orchestrate to create really compelling customer experiences. And if you think across all the range of these different services, whether you're talking about fundamentally the pipes that deliver the data and your options for partnership and delivery there, CDNs, et cetera, or whole new platforms, right, that help create digital experiences, whether they're on the traditional web side or even on the mobile side, providers that are facilitating things like push notifications or publish and subscribe. Of course, the third-party applications, whether they're social applications, marketing applications, advertising applications for delivering, personalized content that might be contextually aware, analytics, pixels, etc. A really disparate range of a lot of very interesting third-party services that, on the whole, compose to deliver the customer experience. And because of their ease of orchestration, it creates this really rapid acceleration of delivery. And as a result, consumers are responding, and they're coming into the marketplace with high expectations that companies like yours are actually being able to really capitalize on. And we've seen this with the steady increase in e-commerce sales, not only in absolute terms, but especially in relative terms as well. That there's a very high expectation and consumption on the digital channel, across the digital channel. And so in response to that, to capture this new emerging digital opportunity, businesses are pouring investment into digital initiatives. In a recent global survey, TCS found that the typical Fortune 2000 organization will spend well over $100 million in deploying and building the assets supporting their digital initiatives. And most of these organizations, 70% of them, consider that their initiatives are the most important initiatives. These digital initiatives are the most important ones to their organization, and their business would succeed or fail based on the success of these projects. Well, that's a lot of risk, right? The land grab in the digital space has been dubbed by many as the digital transformation, and largely what this represents is, retooling across industries to adapt to the demands of these new consumers, these digital natives, right? As well as fending off competition from the quote-unquote cloud native startups. And so you see a lot of interesting replatforming initiatives. Very recently at Mobile World Congress, there was a pretty well televised or well documented interview with the head of digital for Pizza Hut, and he really emphasized the fact that the way in which they're going to market needs to be a truly immersive digital experience, and so they really see themselves as being a digital native company now and competing on those terms. And what companies, as they go through this digital transformation, are realizing is that while doing this transformation, you can reduce costs and you can fuel product innovation. The real advantage is that it delivers a really remarkably improved customer experience. Really, it's about customer experience, and that's becoming the point of competitive differentiation and advantage. And I thought it was interesting here. I just put up a little example comparing Apple and Samsung. And if you look at the Apple iPhone 6 and the Samsung Galaxy S5, those two phones on a pure technology or product or feature standpoint are actually very, very comparable. The ratings are very similar. You could argue, in fact, that Samsung, the device itself, is actually superior to the Apple iPhone 6 in a lot of ways. And yet, there's a huge difference in how the business performance of Apple is being realized versus that of Samsung. In terms of earnings, right, Apple's earnings are 6.5 times the profit of Samsung's. And their growth this year over last year, comparing third quarter Q14 to Q13, is nearly 25% greater than Samsung's. And again, you ask yourself, fundamentally, the products are similar, but the difference is all in the customer experience being delivered there. And that's where truly unique competitive advantage happens. Samsung can't innovate Apple when it comes to technology. They're simply being crushed on the customer experience side. So what makes for a great digital customer experience? Well, we think that it's really the synthesis of three things: quality, performance, and design. Truly elegant design that creates a very compelling, enriched, interactive experience that is truly functional, it's absolutely reliable, it doesn't have issues, it doesn't have flaws, and that it's delivered in a fluid, very responsive way. That's the performance side of the triad. And really, this is an important concept because as you start looking at what are the risks in delivering that great digital experience, that customer experience, on the performance and quality side, we've been documenting this and trying to evangelize this for a long time here at Keynote, but we really do believe that that's a significant part of risk that oftentimes is left in the blind spot, so to speak, of an enterprise's view in how they go to market and deliver digitally. Customer expectations are only getting higher. The 3-second rule, so to speak, that seems to be even coming down further. In fact, there was research recently that suggested that 250 milliseconds could be the difference in terms of competitive advantage. That's literally the blink of an eye. And when you experience an application and you experience a flaw, you experience a crash, that has significant impact on a consumer's ability and their interest to re-engage with your brand. whether it's the abandonment rate, and whether it manifests as abandonment rate in shopping carts, or in terms of your app's engagement rate, or whether or not you're going to actually abandon usage and interaction with the brand altogether. The stakes are definitely high. What we've seen is that all of this innovation, this rapid change in the demographics, the ascent of the digital transformation, the pouring of investment into digital initiatives has given rise to a new owner, or a new head and strategy thinker within the organization that is focused on digital, and that's the Chief Digital Officer. And this is still an emerging thing, and we think that the trend is either going to manifest itself as formal ownership in the term of the CDO, or perhaps even an informal ownership, be it in IT as the CIO, or perhaps some other owner within the business. But fundamentally, there's a convergence of the necessity to have a single person who is really truly resourced and managed against the success or failure of digital initiatives. And it's all kind of happening within organizations that's creating more and more tension and more pressure. And that pressure to work together, especially from the business side and the IT side, is something that we think is an important dynamic, because what we find today is that although you really need, in order to get a truly functional digital capacity, digital delivery capacity, you need both sides. You need both the line of business, the digital asset owners, and IT to work together frictionlessly. Often we find this is just simply not the case, right? Especially around the need to deliver rich, interactive experiences while at the same time maintaining exceptional quality and performance. We hear consistently that trying to manage performance is like herding cats, right? The business wants more. They want more advertisements. They want more social features. They want more tracking pixels. They want larger images. They want it right before your highest traffic period with no time to test. Content is coming, from more and more places outside of control. There's A/B testing happening all the time. It's happening quicker with less regard for what the customer, ironically, has to endure. One of our customers in the media industry, they recently compared his website to that of, the house in the neighborhood where about 50 cats live. It looks okay from the outside, but nobody wants to go in it. And so often we find that the relationship between IT and digital owners, it suffers from a lack of common understanding around this notion of performance. So that's kind of my introduction to set the stage here to what we think is the more interesting part of the discussion, which is around, creating a very strong marriage between IT and digital owners. And so I'm going to bring Seth into the conversation here, but before I do, excuse me, I just wanted to set the stage with something that we found is kind of an interesting visualization of what often happens within this dynamic of the digital versus the technology organizations trying to manage something that together they want to achieve the same goal and end purpose, but often breaks down because we simply have kind of a lack of understanding. We have different languages that we speak, right? There's a bit of a he said, she said dynamic that often occurs, and largely it's around the way in which both sides of the house fundamentally set up their key performance indicators and their metrics that they manage to essentially, hopefully, create the business outcomes that they'd like to achieve, right? Those business outcomes being, revenue, being retention, being the reduction in the cost of service, et cetera. And so, the way in which usually that line of business side of the house, the digital owners, they think about managing from a metric standpoint their outcomes and their goals, their objectives to delivering digital successes around business and user behavior. On the IT side of the house, though, the focus tends to be very much around technology behavior. And that's what creates this divide, we think. How do you express the fact that your SLA of 28 seconds for the configurator transaction, is actually supporting the business's goal of trying to get growth, right? What does 28 seconds mean to the business? Is it the right number? What happens when it hits 29 seconds? What is the impact of that to some of the key metrics and performance indicators that the business is thinking about in terms of abandonment and exit rate, right? Or conversion being the converse of that. They're measuring a different set of KPIs, and we need to find ways to make these align better. So with that, Seth, I hope you're still there.
Still here.
Hey, he's there. Great. So I'm going to bring Seth into the conversation because I think it's one of the things that is really interesting is that as we look at a few kind of key questions that we think are important to ask and be able to answer, again, regardless of what side of the fence you kind of sit on, Seth has a really interesting perspective. He's engaged in customer engagements where he's sitting in these rooms with our customers on a regular basis and has really experienced all of the issues that we've just kind of talked through and can really lend a valuable perspective here. So Seth, I want you to kind of respond, if you could, to question number one. Are we aligned on our goals and objectives? Is there a good shared understanding of objectives, especially within IT as it relates to what the business is trying to achieve? And how do we establish and align goals, especially around performance, that help both sides of the business achieve those goals? So what have you seen when you've been in customer engagements, around this notion of alignment and creating frameworks or systems for ensuring that alignment happens?
So thanks, Aaron. That's a great question. So I think this is something that a lot of our customers struggle with. As you said, traditionally you've had two very distinct organizations, and they've developed processes over time internally specific to those organizations that help them drive kind of their own objectives and goals. And what we're seeing moving forward is that those goals need to be more directly aligned in order to help move the business forward a lot of times. And the areas where we've seen most success now is within organizations that have started to understand each other with regards to what are the key metrics that both teams are focused on. And performance is a good example of that. We deal with a lot of customers who, on one end, that the digital IT teams are focused on one specific performance metric, and they're kind of leveraging all of their SLAs based on that, and the business and marketing owners are looking at something else. And so coming together and creating a common understanding around what are the overall business objectives and how can we all align around that, as well as what are the key individual metrics that we're going to use to track that success or failure over time across both teams. And that's one of the things that we've helped some of our customers kind of create a platform for doing, and making sure that everybody's speaking the same language around that.
Well, that's interesting. And have you found that there are certain conventions that when you are working with organizations seem to be more functional or more pursuant to those outcomes, to maybe creating the right kind of behavior or forcing the right kind of alignment and communication?
I think one of the key things is thinking about performance, as you saw in that diagram earlier, as a feature and not a not something that should be thought of after the fact, right? So users are thinking about performance unconsciously and experiencing that as a feature of your product or service. And that's been one of the things that I think it's taken a long time for both digital IT organizations and business and marketing folks to come around that idea that we can no longer think about this as something that we fix after we've kind of kicked this product out the door, but it's something that has to be thought of from the ground up, and then using that as the basis for building some of these metrics around tracking performance over time as tied to success.
So it's interesting that I think that's a great entree into what we have suggested here is kind of the second question that you should probably think about and be able to ask and respond to, which is around just that. What are those metrics? How do you measure performance and make it relevant in terms of business outcomes? And so some of the things that we've kind of, we talk about, and I'd like you to kind of elaborate on as you're sitting with customers, is helping to correlate better the notion of responsiveness, performance, availability as it relates to adoption and conversion and engagement, right? And especially across all the channels, be them both desktop as well as web, tablet and smartphone. So yeah, now how have you seen that work within your customer engagements?
Yeah, so I think this gets back to part of what you were saying earlier around context, right? So thinking about performance at a high level is no longer sufficient enough. You have to think about it in the context of all these different platforms, all these different types of engagements you're having with users, and collecting and correlating metrics across different types of tools as opposed to just fixing on a single metric is really what has driven a lot of the customers that we've seen have success in improving performance and driving business outcomes from that is built around that, right? So I know with our new RUM products, being able to capture the real user performance data and tie that directly to the user engagement and things like overall cart size and abandonment of that cart and how that's related to specific inflection points around performance is a key way to make sure that you're looking at the right things across both of those teams.
I think that you had shared with me actually a really great example of that. You'd mentioned the customer who had those conversion pages and was seeing some different things, and maybe you could kind of relate to the audience that little anecdote. Yeah.
So first we had a customer that was we were primarily focused with the digital teams, and we've been seeing some performance impact on one of the pages and had kind of struggled to drive any improvement on that page given the fact that digital team thought that the performance on that page was sufficient. And one of the marketing folks reached out to us to ask specifically about the performance that we were seeing on that page. And after we kind of explained what we thought was going on, what was driving that performance, the response that we got was that the marketing team had been spending a huge amount of money over the last several months to drive traffic specifically to that page to increase signups for a specific product, and they weren't seeing the improved, they were seeing kind of the improved rate of traffic to that page per the marketing initiative, but they weren't seeing an increase in sign-up as a result. And as we started to peel the layers back, it was tied directly to the performance issue that they were having on that page. And it was just because these two teams were completely disconnected with regards to the marketing team's initiative versus the impact of the performance that was controlled by a separate team, that they were kind of completely in misalignment around that. And so it took kind of some wrangling to get everybody on the same page and make sure that moving forward they were all kind of talking the same language. So that was it was I think an expensive lesson for them to learn.
Geez, that's it's interesting too when you think about, oftentimes those actions can be exacerbating against each other, right? And so obviously the performance issue was creating a lot of grief on the marketing side, but then the marketing investment that was going to driving additional traffic to that page, it probably didn't help the situation at all.
Right, exactly.
So, okay, so I think another thing that I know you guys work with a lot with your customers is helping them to understand this notion of when fast is fast enough. And I know you guys do a lot of different studies and research for your customers. Maybe you can just kind of share some of your ideas and experience around this notion of kind of taking a sense of where you stand relative to your competitors, and again, that additional notion of context, this time in terms of competitive alternatives. What have you seen with your customers in regard to that?
Yeah, so this is a really important new area because, as you said, a lot of the differentiator is about how you stack up relative from a user experience perspective to your closest competitors, those around you, right? And I know historically a lot of the context around what metrics do we use to drive performance has for a long time really been driven at a very high level by some research that was done by Google and Microsoft and a couple other very technical organizations many years ago. And the landscape has shifted dramatically in the last even 2 to 3 years with regards to what impacts overall performance, et cetera. And sites are constantly evolving, right? Constantly changing. And so what your competitor was doing a year ago might be completely irrelevant at this point. And this is one of the things we've seen with some of our customers. And again, a couple of the ones that we've seen be the most successful in continuing to drive their products and services are those that are constantly measuring themselves against not only their closest competitors within their specific industry vertical and seeing how they stack up there and maybe why their competitors are doing better in certain areas, but also looking at best-in-breed sites and services across the web to understand how they can be better than those in their own vertical. Because we all know that a lot of user expectations are driven by sites like Google and Facebook, et cetera, where the response time is extremely fast and users become conditioned to that, right? So it's important to make sure that you understand not only how you compare to your closest competitors and what they're doing to continue to push the envelope of their site and user experience, but also those across the web that are representing the best in breed and really setting user expectations.
Well, on that point, Seth, I think it's fascinating, this notion of, really who is your competitor, who are you that chief digital officer said that he actually does not compare himself competitively to Domino's or Straw Hat, but rather Amazon, because the digital experience that they want to create, in their case, they're really focused on mobile and now even the Internet of Things, getting into cars, creating special apps, to take advantage of the 17-inch touchscreen in a Tesla, for example, with iBeacon technology, such that when you order a pizza, you roll up and they know exactly who you are and what you've just ordered, and you can just kind of like throw it at you as you whiz by. Their competition now is really Amazon. It's not those other guys, and so that's the kind of experience that they're striving to compare themselves to. And even if you look in other examples like a GoPro, for example, manufacturer of the GoPro camera. Well, they're actually now really in the business of delivering content as a digital content provider, and that's their core focus because it's building that experience. It's creating a YouTube-like experience for their consumer that is actually driving engagement and adoption and usage of the camera, and the camera becomes kind of a secondary thing. I think it's a very interesting point, and understanding your comparisons is extremely critical.
Totally.
Okay, so let's explore another question, and this has to do with quantifying the return on digital experience investment. And this is something that, of course, there is so much investment that's going to be made in terms of the design that you create, the assemblage of the different functions and features and capability inside of that experience. But there's also this notion of all of that investment in those services. We talked about at the beginning of the presentation, so many third-party services in particular that you're investing in, that you're essentially renting to create an orchestrated experience. And so how do you understand the trade-offs there with regard to those providers? But then, moreover, as you mentioned earlier, Seth, this notion of performance as a feature. How do you build that into the trade-offs that you're going to make, in terms of design choices that you'd make in creating your experience? So, what have you seen with regard to customers that have been trying to wrestle with this concept, and any anecdotes maybe about where this has been either successful or a point of pressure for them?
Yeah, so this is a good question, and this is one of the things that's the most difficult to kind of get your head around. There are a lot of moving pieces in understanding this question. Like you said, it's not just performance, but it's overall design, it's overall technical quality, et cetera. And I think the last piece we talked about around understanding your competitors, et cetera, is a big part of that, and understanding where your users are going, right? So a good example is a customer that we do some ongoing competitive analysis for, and it's been going on for about 3 years now. And for the first year or so, we kind of saw where both sites were performing pretty similarly. There were kind of some trade-offs here and there, quarter over quarter, but no real difference from a high-level perspective. And then about a year and a half ago, we started to see a pretty sharp divergence between both organizations. And what we kind of discovered as we peeled things back is that one company had decided to take the approach towards everything mobile first, right? So their idea was, we're going to create the best mobile experience we can, the fastest mobile experience we can, and from there we're going to drive the rest of the design changes around the core site. Whereas the other site decided our engagement is going to be based on feature-rich user experiences. So rather than focusing on performance, it was more about, let's try to pack as many features as we can into the experience that the user has when they come to our page. And I think that the challenge is that sometimes you can't know how that's going to pan out until quite a bit of time is passed, right? But making sure that you're tracking overall performance as a result of these decisions, along with user engagement, user conversion, et cetera, is what really helps make sure that those decisions are making sense. And using things like the real user data that we have to make sure that when you do a release and push something new out, you can track in real time what's the impact that's having on your user. Is it something that is now positively affecting things, or are we seeing a negative impact very quickly, so that you can start to mitigate those things as needed as soon as you've made the change?
Well, I think the other thing too that you had shared with me about kind of the dynamic at play here with managing your investment too is that oftentimes there can be kind of a bit of neglect or bloat, so to speak, that can accumulate over time with regard to the rapid introduction of maybe new third-party service providers, for example, to help create a specific kind of piece of functionality or something in the site, but then the site moves on, and maybe that third party doesn't get removed, and that kind of builds up over time. And what have you seen there with yeah?
So good follow-up question. So the third-party content, as you alluded to earlier, is becoming one of the biggest areas of kind of growth and change for individual sites. We deal with a lot of sites now where maybe a year or two ago they had your kind of standard third-party content, maybe Omniture, DoubleClick, a couple of different third parties on there for kind of the standard services. But now those same sites are in a situation where maybe 50 to 70% of the requests on any given page, and this is independent of vertical, are going to be coming from third parties, and all different kinds of things. And one of the things that we've seen is as organizations have moved to leverage third parties to do things that they wouldn't be able to do themselves, there has been a disconnect between the folks that manage and maintain and build the site and infrastructure, and then those on the business and marketing teams that are typically in control of and managing the third-party content. And getting back to the point we made earlier, when you have a disconnect between those two teams, there's often a lack of understanding around the impact that third-party content can have on the site experience itself. And so you end up in a situation where folks start to add a lot of third parties because one person on the team likes Omniture, another person on the team likes Google Analytics, even though the functionality and data that's provided by both of those tools has a large area of overlap. And you see that across the board. And so making sure that third-party content that's on a site actually is being utilized and providing value is one key area that I think a lot of organizations struggle to stay on top of. And then in addition to that, understanding not only the performance impact that third party has on your site, but also is that third party performing well with regards to the other third parties in that space, right? If this is an ad service provider, is it performing well relative to its own competitors, and making sure that you keep track of how well those third parties are doing from an SLA perspective. If you're depending on this additional service to provide value to your users and your site, and that third-party service is slowing things down, the user isn't going to blame that third party. They're going to blame you and your site, right? So making sure that you stay on top of how those are relating to the content on your site is a critical thing moving forward as more and more of these services get pushed to third parties that are outside of the control of the core team and core business.
I think we stole thunder from the last question here with regard to continuous improvement. But actually, I just wanted to kind of probe a little bit more deeply on that last point, Seth, with regard to continually kind of improving your third parties and trying to ensure that, are they actually delivering to, the service levels. But I think that another aspect of the dynamic that I'd love your take on here is that if we go back to that whole notion of, IT having to reconcile the pressure for delivering a great customer experience against the needs of the business and the digital owners that are continually kind of, pushing more stuff down, so to speak. Sometimes that gets articulated in contentious, arguments, perhaps, and perhaps maybe misinterpreted or misperceived views of, that the partnerships in IT not being a two-way street. I think one of the interesting aspects about what you were just saying with regard to doing your audits and looking at, your third parties is that if you do have visibility to alternatives in terms of design alternatives or in the case of third parties, other service provider alternatives, being able to then come back to the business with recommendations about, it's not just, hey, this isn't working good, stop using this thing, but, and oh, by the way, here's a list of about 2 to 3 other alternative providers that based on our intelligence, we think actually can deliver this same service in a more highly performant manner. That kind of changes the dynamic, I would think.
Right, absolutely. And I think, like you said, one of those key things is making sure that both of those organizations are aware of what's going on. What we've seen historically is that third-party content is typically managed outside of the technical teams, and they have very little impact and very little say in what's going on there. Really good example, again, this is another expensive lesson by one of our customers, was a couple of years ago when a customer decided they were going to revisit their CDN strategy to make sure that their content was being loaded as optimally as possible, and they spent a significant amount of money and effort to make sure that happened. And they flipped the switch, and we saw almost no change in performance across any of the pages. And they were kind of up in arms about our data being incorrect and blah, blah, blah. And when we started to look at what was driving that, what we found is that on many of the pages that they were expecting significant improvements, the content that they had offloaded to the CDN was performing extremely well. They had seen a direct improvement in that content. The problem was that content made up less than 30% of the requests on the page. And the majority of content was third-party related, and it was offsetting all of the gains that they had made through the CDN initiative. So they underwent a 6-month auditing process of their third-party services to make sure that they could understand what they all were, et cetera. And after 6 months, a full third of the domains on the site were unaccounted for. They couldn't find an owner. They couldn't figure out why it was there or when it had been added or what it was doing there. And I think that's the danger when you have this disconnect between those teams is, the IT organization spends a big amount of money. This is kind of the inverse of the example I gave earlier around the marketing team. But the IT organization spends a big amount of money and effort to make some improvement, and that's offset in the other direction by something going on outside of their organization.
Yeah, very interesting. And, just getting, you had mentioned before the notion of using other technologies like, for example, the Keynote real user monitoring solution that to be able to understand when changes like that are made just with immediate real-time information, whether or not those changes are having not only the absolute impact on performance, but the relative impact on then the user behavior, how actual customers are experiencing the site and that content. So in terms of continuous improvement, then I would think that would be a pretty significant requirement, being able to have that real-time feedback, because as we know, the rate of change, especially in the web side, the mobile side as well, daily changes, hourly changes in some cases, certainly weekly changes on the mobile side, that rate of change is something that demands, I would think, a real-time signal that you can use to ensure improvement.
Yep, absolutely. Totally agree.
Super. Well, I think that these are, hopefully the audience finds these questions to be useful and foundational in creating a framework that can really help you to think about ways in which you weave performance into the conversation, but do it in a functional manner that really promotes a healthy and bidirectional exchange and alignment around business outcomes. And one of the things that at Keynote we're really focused on is enabling our customers to be able to do this, to enable them with the tools and the technology to have these kinds of conversations, to create the kind of healthy relationship and the marriage, right, between the digital owners, the lines of business, and IT. And we think that it really starts with this foundation around what we like to call digital business optimization that's based on the Keynote platform. Fundamentally, we are orchestrating technology and products and solutions that help you deliver quality, performance, and a real good comparative understanding of how you rank within your industry, but moreover across all the different competitive alternatives that might be relevant to the way in which you're going to business, and that they are all enhanced when you can harness that information across all the platform to understand really how your performance initiatives are delivering value and ultimately facilitating business outcomes. And so that's really the Keynote platform and what we're really all about. And so with that, I just wanted to wrap up. It looks like we've got maybe a couple questions here, and please, I do encourage you, if you're in the audience, feel free to submit any questions that you have through your Q&A panel. Just one question here, Seth, for you. Just talking about your customers, could you provide an example of a customer where they have thought about performance as a feature and how that has changed their business?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think one area is around customers that are thinking very explicitly about mobile, right? So a lot of the examples we've seen for customers getting into mobile is, oh, we'll just use our current site and repurpose it for mobile, but we know that that really doesn't work, right? You see extremely slow pages, et cetera. We have had a couple of customers that have looked at that, gone down that road, looked at that, and realized, okay, this is kind of killing our users' expectations around what the mobile experience is going to be, and then designing the mobile experience to be explicitly fast and using that as the key feature of the mobile experience. Because that's a lot of times what customers want, right? If somebody's on a mobile device, and this is something that they used their kind of user analytics data to flesh out, and that was customers don't want to spend a huge amount of time doing very complex feature-rich activities on a small screen. They're typically there to do one specific task, and a lot of times that task is being executed on the go, right? And so they need it to be very, very quickly responsive. And so they underwent an initiative to kind of use that as the core driver of their mobile initiative. And as a result of that, they've seen a significant increase in the overall utilization of the services that they're providing as a result of that.
It's interesting. I know your organization has actually done some very interesting research on specifically responsive web design and sites, that employ the responsive technique to delivering an experience that can, basically span across mobile as well as tablet and smartphone experiences, right? I think that, we had gotten feedback from folks when we published some of that research about that was kind of negative in nature, like, well, I should just say that the conclusion from the research was that, most often the vast majority of responsive web design projects, at least based on our survey, result in really a pretty unacceptable user experience, specifically for the smartphone. But although that may have been the takeaway, right, in terms of the actual research, it doesn't mean that responsive web design is inherently non-performant for smartphone users. And I think that's what you're getting at, is taking the mindset and the approach early on in the process and using that to really inform and design, how you actually deliver your project.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay, another question here, and I think we'll probably wrap up on this. So Seth, your team, the Performance Insights team, Digital Insights team, I should say, Digital Performance Insights. So, where do you work? How do you work with your customers? What's kind of the model there for that? Is that is it a managed service? Is it consulting? Can you tell us basically a little bit more about the Digital Performance Insights team?
Sure. Yeah. So it's kind of all of the above. We work with customers, Keynote customers, kind of across the board. Customers that are self-service and need some expertise and understanding a specific set of data. We work with customers where we manage everything from setting up scripts and doing daily triage to monthly analysis. Our key engagements are around monthly analysis and daily engagement via the Insights product specifically, and that's typically where we work with a customer over the course of a year to provide targeted analysis every month around what's going on with the site and use that as a way to help really drive overall performance management and kind of site technical quality. And that's where we've seen a lot of the we've had a lot of success with our customers in helping to drive those initiatives internally. A lot of times the disconnect internally is once he wants to do one thing, once he wants to do another thing, or there's a lot of finger pointing, and we're able to come in as a third party arbiter to some degree and say, here's what the data shows, and here's what we see going on within your specific vertical or across the web, and here's what we would recommend. Especially since you have a limited amount of time and resources, we think this is what you should be focused on. The other key thing that we do is assessments, which are kind of point-in-time engagements with customers that are interested in either looking at a site redesign. They want to understand what's the performance impact going to be, and we'll do an assessment of the current site versus the new site to see are there any gotchas there that might cause problems. We also do competitive engagements to help customers understand how they stack up relative to those in their industry, or again across the board, and make some of those recommendations about what should be focused on to help kind of move things past this key competitor or help improve things overall. So those are the key engagements that we have.
Great. Fabulous. Well, Seth, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today and providing your thoughts and perspective on how customers can gain digital success in this new digital transformation. I want to just thank everybody on the line today for attending. Again, feel free to reach out to anybody in the Keynote family, be it your dedicated account manager or either Seth or myself as well. And of course, you can always reach us at the info@keynote.com alias. This concludes our webcast for the day. Again, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you on a new presentation soon.
Thanks, Aaron.
All right.